Hello everyone, I'm sitting here with Alessandro Pasero. Thank you for taking the time.
It's my pleasure.
Before we start, maybe you can introduce yourself a bit in a way, like how you found architecture, and maybe then later the topic that you do your PhD on, how you found like the first contacts with these topics.
Sure. Okay, so thank you for the time, the space, and the invite, first of all. So I'm an architect. I've been trained as an architect, and I've been studying architecture between Milan and Brussels. And my practice, I would say that it moves between architecture, installation, and performance, in the sense that usually my projects try to deal with local conditions, and then the projects it's always very contextual, and then I see where it goes and what type of form it takes. Usually the time of the project itself is also very dictated by its conditions. So it can be a performance or an installation or a pavilion or something more stable, but it's really based on the time and the space. And currently I'm a PhD candidate at the Politecnico di Milano, where I'm developing a research project that is supported and funded by the Triennale di Milano. And the project is on performance as a mode of architectural production in the 21st century. So it deals with enactments and performances and very temporary types of interventions as a proper mode of architectural production and as a way of dealing with space as architects. And I would say that research and practice are very much informed. So the way I research and what I write about is also the way that I practice architecture. So it's a design-driven project where I study about space, performativity, and the way space can inform architectural production in a very performative way. But then it's developed also through projects and through my personal practice.
Okay, I'm gonna structure this by 3 different definitions of lightness, and then we can talk about each one. And what comes to your mind with the word lightness? What do you think about?
That's the first one.
Well, no, that's before I start.
Okay, sorry. With the word lightness, I think that something that goes against the very first core principle of architecture. Mm-hmm. So if architecture should be around firmitas and the idea of stability and permanent and heavy construction, then we have lightness as a way to move around the discipline and try to stress and move around condition and go into the margin. But also the word itself, if we consider it in the English language, it holds the words light. Mm-hmm. So it kind of keeps up with this positive and optimistic way of using lightness in the sense of softness and temporary and really thoughtful and careful and quick, mm-hmm. as a way to deal with space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's nice. I think that also sums up a bit the structure of the podcast. But let's jump into the first definition of this English word that has these many meanings, which is the lack of weight. I think what interests me a lot is this: from being nomads, humans used to carry around everything they need to live, to now, according to a study from Werner Sobeck, each German having like 480 tons of material assigned to them, including infrastructure.
Oh, okay.
Sure. Yeah, it's a lot of infrastructure. Yeah, this heavy cityscape that a lot of us call our homes, with this topic of ephemeral and performative aspects in mind, how do you look at our built environment? Okay.
That's tough. I never knew actually about the number, the precise amount of number of tons of kilos of material that we all have on our shoulder, and it's pretty impressive. Like it's scary almost.
It is scary, yeah.
And I think it explains very well, let's say, the burden and the weight that building and being part of the building acts implies. This datascape of infrastructure and weight and resources that I don't know if we need or that we have for sure. Mm-hmm. Maybe we don't need all of that. Mm. It implies the complicity that is within the idea that we need to still contribute to the built environment by building massive amount of construction material. So if we go back to your point about dealing with a nomadic way of life, or how we live in the cities and in the world today, which is very nomadic. I mean, each one of us has many tons of weights of infrastructure and concrete and resources, but at the same time, we do not always own all of it. It's actually, it's on us, but it's not of our property. Mm-hmm. And this has to do with the political framework that we live inside. And then I would say that most of us live in a very nomadic way, in a very, let's say, light way. The things we carry with us, they're just a few. And then that's also maybe the reason why you can try to adapt to other contexts and to deal with that. But this is not just, but that doesn't really mean that you can work with space in the same ways in every space. So of course, context remains important. Mm. There is, like, say, a flattening process if we consider many parts of the world the same, considering infrastructure and many other data. But then there are specificities and weights and context, I would say.
Yeah, I would agree. What are, like, the stories or mobile aspects that you find in our immobile environment? Like, where do you find what fascinates you, which is often this ephemeral? Where do you find it in the city or in our built environment?
Like, I often find myself, like, if I have to answer this question, which is pretty difficult because I never thought about, like, what am I fascinated inside a city? I think, like, the easiest way to answer is to think of what I take pictures about in a very basic way, like with my phone. Mm-hmm. I take pictures, like, of what I find a bit odd, or like sometimes it's a bit out of scale or non-design in the city. Like, I could take a picture of, like, the canopy of a bus stop, or like a big object that could be like a piece of a staircase of, like, an arena in a park, like everything that's involved with people moving around or waiting, or with the need of someone to get a bit of shelter, but all of them in a very temporary way. Mm-hmm. I think these are, like, let's say, the types of architecture, the typologies of architecture that I look at. Mm-hmm. So they are about movement and, let's say, logistic and infrastructure, because that's the way I think today we should look at cities, are big knots of fluxes, of people, of resources, of materials, of immaterial things like networks and data, but then all of them materialize through small scale. I think that's also the easier objects to relate to, the ones that are more or less human scale. Mm-hmm. They're also the ones that tell you a lot about the type of spaces where you live in, the benches, the bus stop, the street lights. These three things tells you about how unequal or hostile a city is, how they care about gender and safety, and so on. So I think through these things you could also understand signals and landmarks and smoke signals of how a city and how its space behave.
Mm-hmm. That's a beautiful perspective. It's almost like the furniture of the city in a way.
Maybe like, because the monuments are there. We know that if you go to a city, we need to look at the monuments, the historical ones. Of course, they are on the postcards. They are on the imaginary of the city, and they carry a precise historical significance that then, of course, today we question. But then, if you really want to see how a city is formed, maybe you should also look at this the smaller things.
It's like closer to the people's lives. Yeah. Okay. I also this image of, for example, scaffolding on a multi-story concrete building. I think it also is like an image of like an embodiment of the time scale or the intended time span of use of something that we grew accustomed to, that when it's concrete, it's this big, it's permanent, or we like to imagine that things are permanent and not always moving. Do you think that this concrete house could use a bit more of what the scaffolding has, if you know what I mean?
I think I do. Like, we could look at the scaffolding as, not always, but sometimes we could look at them as a temporary infrastructure of possible change and interventions that should not just put back in order what's behind, but maybe also they create hope of something different. They could enact different scenarios in the head of the people looking at it, hoping that something different is gonna appear when they leave, but also maybe that in the meantime of the process of the construction itself, maybe the scaffolding itself, the temporary construction itself, could be a space too. I think I really like to look at scaffolding. It was actually my master thesis project. Was a project for a public space in Milan that was in an abandoned space. They kept not building because it was better for the city to rent it as a billboard space.
Oh wow!
For many reasons that we could imagine about capitalistic dynamics of the city. But then my proposal was about using the same scaffolding that are there as spaces to, let's say, enact a possible square, a piazza. So the scaffolding was becoming an object of hope, an infrastructure for the city to become something else through very minimal intervention. And so we could also think that the scaffolding kind of deal with contemporary ruins of the city, and so in this way they kind of represents a possible future archaeology of what we could find if we design some parts of the city differently. So they work in different temporalities.
Yeah, very different temporalities than a concrete building, definitely. Oh, do you have favorite structures?
Do I have a favorite structure?
Several, or do you have some architecture that you are obsessed with?
I like a lot to see projects that in this sense works with scale or against the scale or out of the idea of scale itself. But if I have to think also of this theme, since we are in this structural space, I think of the very, very first projects of Elisabeth Diller and Riccardo Scofidio, when for the first, let's say, 10 years of their career, like they just started and they were working in theater sets and in scenography sets, having really deep thinking process about space and audience, but they were experimenting with materials with wonderful choreographers, of course, but I think of, I don't know, like moving targets or other type of projects where the idea of tilting a mirror or constructing projection through minimal means, they were making space in a very light way, often just using light itself or reflection, or creating just the right points for dancer to grip on or to be caged. What I love about those projects is the way that they deal and question a lot the body of the performer itself, the one of the audience that sometimes was reflected in the work, but sometimes had to deal with this space and then the way the body was constrained. For this reason, I don't know if I should answer with built projects, but the slow house, the first house that they built that they never finished because many are the reason, but mostly it was expensive. They were not out of commission, but the structure of the slow house itself is not just a wonderful structure itself, but it reflects the idea that domesticity was developed around television at the time, and so the section of the house itself worked around the temporal setting and the temporal passing of the day and night, and that's how it adapts to the context. I love Smiljan Radic's structure, of course, and the way that sometimes he puts that in places where they're not supposed to be, or in contrast with the scale of where they were. But most of the time, I find myself very fascinated by regional and local and vernacular structures. Since, I mean, we are not never inventing something; we are always copying.
Yeah.
Better or worse, but that's, I mean, it's always a matter of copying and learning from something that's already done. So I think that's also still so valuable.
Yeah, I find the word vernacular is also, I wonder if it can still be the word of these structures that, I mean, often there's materials that come from all over the world and it's scrap or it's trash and something's built with that. I wonder if there's like a new, how do you call this? Because vernacular for me, I always think about like very rooted and
like
natural and regional things. And nowadays, every city has this mix of vernacular techniques and very global material fluxes and influences. So that's just a side.
No, but I think it's impossible to think otherwise. Even if like it's all about like a big global village where the leftovers of another country may become the resources of something else, but also including the trash you were referring to.
Yeah, I think Smiljan Radic also has this essay about fragilities, where it's really about these makeshift shelters of people. I think it's such a place where so many things come together, and it's very interesting topic. But let's switch a bit to the lightness in the sense of luminance or brightness. It feels like often the architectural language with daylight is fully glazed facades or small windows in massive walls. Like I feel like the vocabulary of dealing with light is much more home in these ephemeral structures than it is. The more permanent it gets, the more our structures seem to struggle with how to deal with daylight, and the daylight becomes the only moving part in a space in a way. Do you think that light in that way is like an ephemeral agent, or?
No, definitely. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think all of the natural elements can be considered part of, let's say, the architectural elements of construction. If we consider a building like an organism, it's designed including the fluxes of fluids and gases and solid material that it has inside. So this is something that I very much look at the word of Andres Hake, Office for Political Innovation, in the way that architecture is an entanglement of fluxes, of fluids, of human and non-human interactions. So when we talk about the light being an element, and that it's something that it's deal with sometimes in a very boring way just through glass facade, then we should consider what does that glass mean and entangle. And Hake explains it very well, that sometimes the glass brings with itself problems and issues of extractivism of materials that should not be here or should not be taken from the earth itself. And if we go back to all the natural elements like the water, the light, fire too, heating, I mean, they're all part of this of an architecture that should be intended as an assemblage of many things. So we shouldn't consider just the form itself. I think we're over that decades in which we consider architectural design a form-making thing, dealing just with shape in a very formal approach. I think we need to be aware that's resources, that's implants, that's everything else. It's within the design, and it's within the architect's choice and liability. So we need to understand that, of course, we also need to understand how light works, but not in the sense that architecture is a playful relationship between shadows and light. Yeah. Because sure, it's a three-dimensional thing, so that for sure has to deal with shadows and light, but more about how we deal with natural light, with electricity, with everything else that's around it, with opacity of a building.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we might be over it, over this form-focused discipline, but our built environment in many ways doesn't really reflect this idea of flux.
For sure.
Yeah. So I think that's part of what I mean with how we deal with these fluxes, or how our
hiding is not always better.
Yeah.
As much as showing or having glass facades and full transparency is not always good as well. Yeah. Fascist regime architecture had transparency as their motto in the way that they wanted to show people that they were gonna build a transparent architecture, meaning that they were gonna build a transparent regime, a transparent politics. But that, of course, didn't happen. But then also too much transparency maybe is not needed or useful.
Climatically.
Exactly, as well. But also because like the relationship we have with privacy and publicity is changing a lot. Beatrice Colomina explains it very well. She's saying it for like 30 years.
Who?
Beatrice Colomina. I mean, the relationship we have with our domesticity and the idea to be on display and how much we relate to the collective life. I mean, these values are very much shifting from like 30, 40 years ago. I think so much more now after COVID and pandemic. So all these relationships are changing. And I think that's very much connected with this idea that we should hide installments or things from the building because they don't look good. Yeah. I mean, what I was mentioning before, the Scuola Reggio by Andre Sacche is a very nice example of how you can show everything. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's better. It's a very honest way to deal with contemporary architecture.
Yeah. I also think about forces, because I obviously have this obsession with lightweight structures, balancing forces. It's very engineering. It goes more into the field of engineering. But there's also an honesty in showing where the forces go, right? Just like a concrete wall, you don't see where it goes anymore. It's like, this honesty can be seen in many different ways.
No, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. What spaces do you remember where daylight played an essential role in how the space made you feel? Or do you have like a place where your memory goes when you think about how light affects space?
Every question gets a bit harder. I think there are I was born and raised in Rome, so that's gonna be a very obvious reference for someone with my background. I mean, I was born and raised in Rome, living very much in the center of the city. Then I moved to Milan and then north to study. But if I think about architecture built around light, I of course think about me as a kid going to the Pantheon on like a Sunday, and then you just see that you enter this space which is a bit dark, and then you see this almost very spiritual image that is just light itself. There is always a bit of dust in this space, and there is a bit of chit-chat too, and this kind of materializing this bit of dust and glow around the light. And I think this image is very much close to other images that someone could have about clubbing or raving, where the space is dark in a different way for different reasons, but not in so different ways of gatherings. It's always about bodies finding themselves around a space and for a shared reasons. and it's still a ceremony somehow. And then there are some laser spaces that occupy the central space. I remember this work by Traum Nouvelle, the Belgium office. They did this horsed stage inspired by Danteum, by Terragni, which was like a light version of a project. And you could find these kind of columns made of light that kind of reminds of this idea of a big contrast.
Mm-hmm. I love the comparison between the Pantheon and clubbing. That's great. I also remember this the light as a body in the Pantheon. Really, I think in general, dust and light have a beautiful relationship.
Yeah. The small bodies.
Yeah, it's like dust reveals the body of light, but also light reveals dust. Because I think it's a beautiful relationship.
This idea of the space of the Pantheon. Because I haven't been in Rome in a while, and most recently I've experienced the Pantheon somewhere else. I when I was in Armenia recently, after the pavilion was built and inaugurated, I went to do some trips around other places in the country, and I went to this Gerhard monastery, which is one of the oldest monasteries they have. It's incredible. It's like part of it's excavated in the rock, and at some point in a way smaller scale, there is a space that somehow reminded me of the proportion of the Pantheon, because in the excavation of the rock of the mountain, they made a hole in the ceiling, which is direct sunlight. You access it through a very dark, narrow corridor. So at some point it's really strong. Everything is carved, so there are 4 columns, but the centrality of the space is very much respected in this sense, and it's nowadays a sacred space where people go there and pray. And a lot of Orthodox people, by praying, they sing, and so it's a very, let's say, emotional space, because you see the dust. It's very dusty since it's carved in the rocks. You see the light. And then you also hear this praying going on, and it's pretty strong place to experience.
It sounds amazing.
Yeah.
All right, we got a third definition here, which is feeling of lightness. So feeling lightness can be, it's a philosophical idea, I guess. It can be of a mental or emotional nature, right? You feel unburdened for some reason. You just manage to do something big you want to do, and then you feel lightness maybe. And then there's also the physical sense of lightness. For example, when you swim, you have a bit of a weightlessness. Because these moments of lightness are often short or smaller, they become very significant in a way. I just think it's beautiful that this also correlates with ephemeral spatial phenomena. I think there's a correlation between this feeling and the actual space. And I wonder what are moments of lightness for you?
Moments of lightness. I was thinking that when you were explaining let's say the philosophical concept, like the approach to this third way of seeing lightness, when you were explaining this, it came to my mind a very short fantasy book that is written by Italo Calvino, that for Italian is it's a pretty famous writer. Yeah. I think Le Città Invisibili, it's a very architectural book, so in many architect school. But then there is this other book that's called Il Visconte Dimezzato, which means the noble cut in half. There is this guy who gets cut in half, but they become two person walking around. It's quite fun as a child. But then you read it again as an adult and you get other things. At some point, he explained the difference between being light and being superficial, because often the two things can get together. Like you can think about something in a very light way or in a very superficial way, but it's different. And leggerezza, meaning lightness, is when you can think about things but flying above the things, thinking about them but without ignoring them. Just having the mentality to be able to get a bit above them in order to see the things, not to ignore them, not to avoid them, but to deal with them from a different perspective, and not to feel the weight of them above you. And I think that also reflects the way you were saying, this idea of lightness, that when you swim, you have let's say a membrane, but you're not outside of the water. I feel like that's something that, I don't know, like the radicals, they wanted to do it when they were trying to do these bubbles and inflatables and to be light. And so maybe lightness is also like a mindset, if you're able to enter it for a longer time frame, and that you can use it to get some space in other places and fields. A moment of lightness for me. I remember when I was in this monastery in Armenia, I felt that way. I think it's when you're immersed in something and you are detached from everything, but at the same time you're immersed in something bigger than you. It sounds very religious, but I don't mean it in the way. Just when you feel the connection to the elements and to that kind of magic that there is in the words somehow.
That you can easily forget about also.
Yes,
when you live
that you easily forget about. Yeah,
city lives. Yeah.
But then when you're in a space, which is designed or not, that kind of magic. Yeah, I think that would be like the ultimate goal for like a project. Yeah. To have like just a tiny bit of magic inside, that would be amazing.
Yeah. Do you have a moment where you felt that there's a certain moment in your career so far where you felt like, okay, this is where I want to be, I'm happy here, this is significant, this feels like my thing?
This is the hardest question. At the beginning, when I was trying to understand how I am an architect, not if I am an architect, but how I am an architect, I was trying to understand if I was doing the right things. And maybe in these cases, the best way is just to do things, and doing them, you understand a few things, and maybe you understand them a bit later. So now, without any long history behind me, of course, I would say that when 9 years ago, inside like a festival of architecture in Rome, I had to design something for an abandoned space like an outskirt of a city, and I didn't design anything. I started to collect trash and to put it on display and to do this kind of one-day performance in which I exhibited the traces of the people who were living in the space, even if the municipality didn't want to acknowledge them, because maybe they were not the people for which the urbanism of that area was for. I didn't maybe understand that in that moment that was architecture, that performance itself was a piece of architecture that was dealing with the space itself more than a possible design for a cultural hub that was not going to be built, because that intervention itself started a small but still existing conversation with the municipality and the head of the district that then we knew, and that was interested in the work itself because it was really dealing with the space and with something that we could do in a city like Rome, where the time frames are very long. And then maybe like that's a moment where I think I understood something about one possible way of dealing with space, which is very light, so light that there is not even a structure. We had paint but not to design a tactic urbanism intervention, but just to show people what they needed to see. And maybe that's like, it's one of the dots of a constellation of small-scale projects that are starting to be, let's say, part of a practice in which I can recognize a pattern, in which then I can understand that there is a mode of practice that can work like that, that deals with architecture as well as navigating through institutions and different levels of cultural work, because that's also a way to let's say, to go. Another project which I really care about, that is maybe another one, it was this project, this research-based project, which then became an installation for a research center called Domaine de Beaubouchet, which is in France. And it was this research on a agricultural phenomenon due to climate change in the Bordeaux region of France. And it became the design of a firebox that was lit around dying cherry trees. And this piece, it was not just a performance of a night itself, but it became a way to deal with a much bigger problem of that area. So I feel like I can see myself making sense of what I do when I put together different scales and different temporalities and different geographies. So, in a transcalar way, maybe.
It's a really good feeling to see a pattern, right?
Yeah, at some point it is.
Because it becomes kind of your way of working. And I think it's beautiful to do things and then by reflecting on them, find maybe your fascinations, or find out new things about yourself in a way. I think this practice of reflecting is very valuable.
But that's also how the research in academia started. It started after practicing for a while, after working for a while, after a few projects, and then I realized that the two things inform each other, because it's not really separated.
Yeah. I think it can be hard to earn money, or to find a way to earn money, but also try to just do things, and then by reflecting on them, finding like your way of doing it. I think a lot of the formats of our working life are not really meant to be that way. It's often plan what you want to do and do it as you plan to do it. And then, I don't know, in general in architecture, that's how it's done. And I think that's beautiful that you found a way to...
But I think also sometimes there is no time, because you have to make the project, you have a deadline. But maybe sometimes it's also fine like this. So you go into this kind of rabbit hole and you do the project, and then maybe you realize things about the project after. You realize that inside that project there are many things that you didn't see before.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for the interview.
Thank you.
It was really nice, really interesting.
It was fun.
Before we come to an end,
Sure.
You wanna maybe say where people can find your work, what you're working on right now, or?
Yeah, I mean, I'm based in Milan, and my writings can be, I think, found either on my social media or just on the internet. There is this publication by the Armenian Architecture Biennial, for which I've designed a pavilion recently.
Very beautiful pavilion.
Thank you. And there's some essay not about the pavilion itself, but about everything else around it, but the project, which I think is something like what we were saying before. And this book that's called Performing Architecture by DPR Barcelona, for which I've been asked to write the introduction, just got out yesterday.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I had some space to write a piece about the relationship between architecture and performance. Today, yesterday, in the 70s, and I don't know, tomorrow it's a bit of a free write. And yeah, that's it. I'm working on a bit of a small scale projects for a couple of domestic devices for a commission. And yeah, that's it. That's it.
Sounds good.
Thank you.